I've never been the ruler of my own dreams. These are the closing days of the Third Era. I have seen the gates of Oblivion, beyond which no waking eye may see. Worse is yet to come. Who now will save us from the coming darkness? Find him, and close shut the jaws of Oblivion.
Soldiers of Cyrodiil, the Empire will stand or fall by what we do here today. Will we let the Daedric do to Bruma what they did to Kavach? Will we let them burn our homes? Will we let them kill our families? No, we make our stand here today for the whole of Cyrodiil. We must hold fast until the hero of Kavach can destroy their great gate. Soldiers of Cyrodiil, do you stand with me?
Hello, and welcome to Politics of Oblivion. Though it probably would be better to refer to it as really the politics of Cyrodiil during the latter stage of the Third Era. But of course, the game itself is Oblivion, so we will be calling it, referring to, this is Oblivion. Similar thing as the politics of Skyrim with Apostolic Majesty. We're going to be talking about the themes, drawing on like real world connections, other sources from other works of literature and film and TV. And I'm joined today by somebody who sort of reignited my sort of boyhood wonder in Oblivion. He was sort of like, encouraged me to try out the remaster, which I did. I got it on Steam. It's Hitman. How are you, Hitman?
Hello, AI. I'm doing wonderful, thank you. So glad that you've had me on to discuss this. And you talk about boyhood wonder. Well, when I was a teenager, I was very enamored with Oblivion. It's one of my favorite games of all time. And when they first released this remaster, well, Shadow dropped it, I was a little bit skeptical at first, because I'm thinking, well, it's very nice they've graphically redone it, but is it really worth buying? And then when I saw that they'd done a few gameplay overhauls and stuff, I thought, okay, I will give this a try, and I bought it, and I have to say I'm not disappointed. I mean, other than the obvious, body type 1, body type 2 rubbish, it's actually excellent, and I'm very surprised Bethesda made such a good move. Though perhaps after the dumpster fire that Starfield's been, they really needed a good PR win, and this certainly has done that for them.
Yeah, definitely. The graphics itself, I mean, it's sort of new life into the world, and it's funny because there are parts of it which do still feel quite dated, because this was a remaster. This wasn't a remake, so there wasn't really anything that was changed. Even like there's I noticed, I saw sort of clip going around of like there's this old one of the characters, one of the NPCs, when she's giving like the player some quest tip or something, and the actress messed up the recording, and she said, "Oh no, let me start this again." And that's still in the remaster. They haven't removed that, which I thought was incredible. But yeah, sorry, Hitman. Okay.
No, there was some great dialogue, and I'm going to keep looking, because there was some great dialogue from the original game, which I'm trying to see if it's still in the remake, including a certain line by an Argonian called Weebamnar in Leowyn. I tried talking to him and I couldn't get him to say it, so I hope they've not removed it. So,
I did come across like, is that the one where it's the Kashyyyk joke? Is that the one you're thinking of?
no, it's something about a certain local delicacy.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's one character. There's like there's an Argonian. There's a lot of when I was in I think it was either Leowyn or Bravo. There's like you have like this from like the Khajiit and the Argonian. There's still like the old racist, racist jokes, like the smelly cat people, the smelly cat folk, or something like that. So you still have
Well, there's
that
other,
sort of
but then also there's the other racial stereotypes with the Khajiit, especially considering what they're doing in Breville.
yeah. I'm guessing they're like for Todd. I don't know whoever does like the law writing. Like he is in each game. Like Skyrim, I made the ultimate joke was that in Skyrim they were the only race or group that are referenced as moneylenders. Yolda in Whiterun, you have to. She wants to borrow money from the Khajiit. Yeah, that's like when you get the mammoth tusk for her and all that sort of stuff. And she borrows money from Khajiit, and they're the only moneylenders. But also that because they're moneylenders, they're also banned from entering like the cities, and they're nomadic.
No,
I
indeed,
I I
indeed.
I mean, I'm sorry, but there must be like one of our guys working in Bethesda in the writing room for the last like 20 odd 30 years.
Yes, the base millennial. He just sneaks it in.
Yeah. And yeah. Um you see that in Fallout 3, when the ghouls they want to coexist in that hotel Tempany Tower, and then actually when you let them in, they just kill everyone and claim it as their own. Yeah, what did Todd mean by this sort of thing? Uh
Another one,
anyway.
why are the Redguard the only race that has +10 to athletics?
Yeah. And is there in the older? I'm just trying to think. Like, is there like an IQ? There's like is there like base IQ on um? Is it the Imperials? I'm trying to think which has like the or base intelligence on the older
Well,
ones
if we're
like
talking about
Daggerfall and stuff.
intelligence, well, Bretons and High Elves start with 50, which is the highest, and so do one of the
Yeah,
Argonian origins starts at 50 as well.
that makes sense actually for the Bretons and the High Elves being the sort of and the High Elves being the elder races. Yeah. So anyway, Hitman, we're coming to talk about the politics of Oblivion, and um, I think it's worth sort of starting off. And I'm not going to do the whole rundown of the Third Empire, but basically, this is the twilight of the Third Era, um, which was brought about by Tiber Septim, the Tiber Wars, where this general who was known as uh, Talos Stormcrown or Shelty Earlybeard, depending um, on texts. And there's also, I mean, there's a whole controversy around that in the law because you have like the Orthodox and then you have the heretical version. But I don't believe in Elven heresy, so we're going to go with the Orthodox one is the real version, as proven by the actual quest line in Oblivion. It's sort of confirmed that he is a god in a funny roundabout way. So, which is really funny when you had people who only started with Skyrim and be on online forums debating whether he was a god or not. And it's like, well, he was because questline reasons in Oblivion, but he ends up he's a general, he's a warrior from Atmora, and he's in the service of King Cuchulainn, who is the king of Falkreath. And he fights against the Reachmen, and eventually Cuchulainn decides to go south into over the Gerald Mountains that separate Skyrim from Cyrodiil, and goes on a campaigning in the Clovian Highlands and the Clovian Hills. And during this time, he has this revelations of the uh, Amulet of Kings, which is a strong form of point of legacy in Cyrodiil, because that was what the supreme god Akatosh gave to the slave queen Alicia. who existed, who was the first sort of empire, the first empire from Cyrodiil to be born. And yeah, during this time, there was the Battle of Sancretor, where he demonstrated, his dragonborn Tiber Septim, Talos's dragonborn powers, which got the Nords and the Bretons on side, because he defeated the Nord and Breton army held up there. And then Cudacain ended up conquering Cyrodiil and was then assassinated, supposedly by the Yuuzhan Tong. If I remember in lore, I think it was meant to be some sort of like a hit by the Yuuzhan Tong, but it could have also been, forces internal. And Talos was elevated as emperor, and he took the title Tiber Septim as the way to sort of ingratiate himself with the local Imperials in Cyrodiil. And then from there, he would spend his life conquering, uniting, and through diplomacy, uniting all the provinces of Tamriel, which is something the Elysian Empire and the Reman Empire could never managed. I mean, for Reman, the second empire under Reman, so the empire before the Septims, came close, but they never got Morrowind because of the tribunal protection over Morrowind. But if I Hitman, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking back to the game Morrowind. I think there was some sort of special relationship with Morrowind during the Third Empire. Basically, it was they get to be Imperial citizens, but it's like a very loosely. It's not exactly like an Imperial province. It's like a protectorate sort of style of control.
Yes, that's right, because obviously Morrowind still have a king, but of course they've still got all the great houses and the tribunal temples. So yeah, it's a very complex situation in Morrowind. But yeah, just to say it's like a colonial province would be an inaccurate assessment. But something I want to say, if we're talking about politics and historical comparisons, but I just want to talk about this because it's interesting, because you've got these three empires of Cyrodiil: the Elysian Empire, the Reman Empire, then the Septim Empire. Well, again, just comparing it to Rome, because the Romans are a clear inspiration for the Imperials in their naming and their aesthetics. But it's like there were three Romes, weren't there? You had Rome, Constantinople, and then Moscow was the third Rome. And Moscow was the third and final Rome to fall. And so is the Septim Empire. Obviously, there would be another one that come afterwards. I think it was the Median or the Titus Empire, or the Median Empire, the one you see in Skyrim. But obviously,
the Mede, the Mede Empire.
And but another comparison is obviously looking at Tiber Septim. You can almost see him as a fusion of two different Roman imperial figures. On the one hand, he's like Augustus, the first Roman emperor. He's this magnanimous, long reigning ruler who's able to unify an empire. But at the same time, I also see quite a bit of Charlemagne in him, because think about it, Charlemagne obviously was king of the Franks. The Franks were a Germanic race of people. Talos Tiber Septim was from Atmora originally, and that's the origin of the Nord. So he's got a very strong Nordo-Germanic heritage. And remember, he's founding of the Third Empire. So again, it's like Charlemagne being crowned king of the Romans after the fall of the original Roman Empire.
Yes. Yeah. No, 100%. No, I think that's a very accurate historical comparison. I mean, I would also say like his warring with the Reach, because and this stream is for people who I'll explain. So basically, you have Cyrodiil and Skyrim and High Rock and Hammerfell are the provinces which are made native to the race of men, and you have the sub-race of men. You have Nord, Breton, Redguard, and Imperial. Now, Imperial are the natives of Cyrodiil, which is considered like the Imperial province. It's where you have the Imperial capital, and this is what the game that's set in, and so you have all the subgroups, and you have the Nords and everything. Now, all men apart from the Redguards, who are basically the black race of men in Tamriel, come from their ancestry before that they were had developed into subgroups. Their ancestry were from Atmora, and they were Atmorans, and then they became like Needs, which are like Proto-Nords, and then it sort of devolved down to there. The Bretons are a mix of elf and Dureni elf and Need, which formed the Bretons. The Imperials are also just I guess like climatized Needs that became, Clovians and the people that populate Cyrodiil, the Imperials that populate Cyrodiil. And so what's quite
with
interesting.
Imperials, sorry, just to
Sorry,
interrupt you,
Hitman,
but
go
there's
ahead.
two. This is again one criticism of Oblivion is that if we go back to Morrowind's world building is really rich and in depth, and unfortunately, when you get to Oblivion and with Skyrim, Bethesda do
It's
dumb
not that.
down a lot of the lore and world building quite a bit, and so Imperials are broken into two groups broadly. You have Colovians in Western Cyrodiil, and then Nibanaeans in Eastern Cyrodiil. The Colovians are very stout, they're very warlike. They're really the ones who are closer to, the Roman archetype, where the Nibanaeans are more crafty, mercantile. They're very good sorcerers as well.
They're basically the Nibonese are basically Greek. I would say they're the Greek element in the empire, and then the Colovians are like the Roman bits. And you also do have and yes, because there's actually subgroups within the subgroups, which is going to be, for people who haven't played the game or don't know, this might be a bit confusing. And in Skyrim, for example, you have you have Nord, but you have Eastern and Western, and that seems to be the political line and the cultural line in Skyrim. So, for example, Western Skyrim is more loyal. It's more connected to the Imperial culture than Eastern Skyrim. Eastern Skyrim is more grounded in its Nordic Atmoran roots. Hence why when you had the Civil War, places like Solitude and Morthal and the Reach and such, and Falkreath was orientated towards the Empire, and then places like Windhelm and Winterhold and were more orientated towards its own sort of ethnogenesis sort of culture and civilization. And the same is also in Hammerfell as well. You got with a same sort of segregated cultural group as well, which are more loyal to the Empire and one more to its own civilizational group. And this is how they're sort of founded along.
Yes, you have the Crown Redguards, and then the other one I think are the Forebear Redguards, if I'm not mistaken. There's something very interesting going on with them because over the years I feel like Bethesda can't make their mind up as to what the Redguards really are, because there are some very clearly Oriental elements in there. Because if you play Skyrim, obviously you've got Nazir, the Redguard member of the Dark Brotherhood. He wears full on Arabic nomadic armor, and they've got scimitars, and some of them, there's a spin-off game years ago called the Elder Scrolls Redguard, where you play a Redguard called Cyrus. Again, Cyrus the Great, king of Persia. So again, there's that element too, and they're very mercantile. But of course, in later games, especially with Oblivion onwards, they seem to be a lot more, shall we say, negrified, shall we say? So perhaps that's just a shift that's happened over time.
Yeah. That is something which is I've noticed they sort of changed. I mean, from my understanding, the Forebears are basically, they've been culturally orientated to the Nords, to the Imperials, and to the Bretons, because they worship, for example, the 8/9 divines. They worship the divine cult, the Imperial cult, and the crowns still worship and adhere culturally and civilizationally to their Yakudan gods, and also they frown upon magic, and so that's how I've always understood them. I don't know the actual, like, on a map, like, if I was to, I mean, this is just a pure guess. I would guess the forebears, so the Imperial loyalist Redguards, would be dominate like urban cities and maybe towns, and then the crowns would be more like rural pagan like folk, which is also like a reference to Christianity, because in the Roman Empire, because of course Christianity took roots in urban centers and cities, and it was the rural places that remained staunchly pagan, because of course the term pagan just means, it means, like, what was it, rural person, or rural.
Well, ultimately, it's actually more like Skyrim, where they're geographically split. Eastern Hammerfell is where you find the forebear, because it's closer to the Cyrodiil and the Empire, where the Western Hammerfell, which is further away, is the more crown-orientated part of Hammerfell.
Oh, okay. You see, I would have done it more urban-rural split, but that's just me. That's just me. But I can see. I mean, yeah, that makes sense why they would do it in that way. And so, yeah, by this time, that of because up to this point, all of the Elder Scrolls games are set during the reign of Uriel Septim, who is the emperor who was assassinated at the beginning of Oblivion. Spoilers, by the way, everyone. And at this point, the Empire has peaked, and in my mind, Hitman, it's gone into like a terminal decline. You have the emergence of these political movements in places like Black Marsh, the home of the Argonians, in the Sunset Isles, the land of the High Elves, and also within the Imperial province itself, places like in Leolwyn, where you have Khajiit nationalists laying claim to the Trans-Nibinaean Bay area, wanting, like, because if you look at a map of Cyrodiil, it sort of stretches down the Nibinese Bay river network, sort of cutting elsewhere the home of the Khajiits off from. Sorry, I saw the cutting the Khajiit off from access to the same river network, and it makes sense that they would be sort of largely populated. That you would have like these sort of populations of Khajiit and Argonians in Leolwyn.
And just to add to that, during one of the side quests where you're doing a task for the Daedric Prince Sher-Gorath, he wants you to terrorize a village of Khajiit that is near Leolwyn, near the border with Elsewhere. So it's interesting, isn't it, that you've got these whole settlements of this other race that are occupying the Imperial capital province.
Yeah. I mean, on the side note, it was a few years ago now, but I remember playing Elder Scrolls Online with a friend. It's probably during COVID, come to think of it now. And when I was playing it, you have they released, like, I think was it Blackwood? I think it's Blackwood, and it was the expansion that included Leolwyn. Now, what they did was they basically upscaled it from Oblivion, so it was like it was the same Leolwyn map and everything, but it was just everything was bigger, and including that region. and you got to explore like the more Kashyyyk sort of settlements, but also the Argonian settlements. And so what you have is you have like what I thought was quite interesting in the way that it was designed was like, so for example, you're coming close to the Argonian border, which you could cross into and explore around there. But you have like these towns and villages, and slowly, like there's like one village where, okay, you got Nibonese men and women and Argonian, and then slowly as you get close to the border, like there's this town where it's basically 50-50 split, and then you suddenly go into more Argonians as you cross into Black Marsh, and then very few men. So there's this really interesting it sort of demonstrates how I know they say cosmopolitan, but actually how ingrained it is even before the empire, where they're really the border itself is, there is a town that sits on the border, which doesn't feature in Oblivion, but it's in the online Elder Scrolls Online, and the border is there, and then suddenly you cross into Blackmarsh over this small like wooden bridge, and then you come across this Argonian village where the building design is actually Aztec. It's like an Aztec temple that you met, and then there's like these sort of what you would call like Mesoamerican style buildings. So it's quite interesting that.
Yeah, because they definitely took some Mesoamerican inspiration for the Dunmer architecture in Morrowind as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, which is that was an interesting one as well. You yeah, and so I mean, I was just going to say, so we talked about the sort of like you've got like this sort of undercurrent of decay in the empire. So the group I referenced, the Kashyyyk, who are seeking the sort of like independence, are actually like originally like a crime syndicate. They're like a crime syndicate that operate within Leowyn and Bravo area, where they are using the selling of skooma, for example. So Bravo becomes like synonymous with just being filled with like these people addicted to skooma.
Yes, and if you actually look at Bravo, it's very run down. All of the buildings are made of like decaying wood. It looks really like dire. It's like a hovel. And there is actually a skooma den where you just have like every night the Kashyyyk just get all of these like beggars in, and they're all just imbibing skooma. And for those who don't know, skooma is like a illicit drug-like substance in the world of the Elder Scrolls. And that's not the only example, AI, because there's again, some of the details in Oblivion, if you look for them, are really interesting, because you have the same situation sort of in Shadenhall. There's a orc woman who runs, I think, a shop, and once a week she will go off into the woods, and she will leave some skooma in a hollowed out rock or tree stump. And if you then wait, some Kamonatong dark elves will come and take the skooma, and presumably take it back to Morrowind. So there's that element as well. That literal foreign crime syndicates are coming in and like funneling drugs into Cyrodiil. Again, it's not too dissimilar to the situation in America with like fentanyl.
Yeah, fentanyl. Yeah, and in Anvil, you got like the pirating, but which, to be fair, pirates have existed along the Gold Coast for what, the quite consistency throughout the Elder Scrolls time period. So it's not anything new. But you also got like a gang of women who are like targeting married men, get them to like the shack outside the city, and then like rob them. And it's by the time your player arrives there, it's public knowledge, but the guards aren't like they hire like diversity hire guards to actually like do it, and then but the diversity hire guards who are posing as like civilians pass it on to you, the player, to do.
And also and also there's two other examples, both in the Imperial City and in Shaden Hall. There are two quests involving corrupt watchguards where you have to try and bring them to justice.
Yeah, and that's the thing, the Imperial City one, he's like, the senior positions are just, corrupt. And also the moth priests cut themselves off from like the world. Priests themselves have been slaughtered in the chapel in Anvil. And you have a prophet as well who's going around, once considered a madman, but now with the desperate times in the Imperial province, he's now sort of the talk of many people, and is people are starting to listen to him because of the dire situation.
No, certainly. It's very much like the Endless Night. And something else we should probably do for more context is we talked about, all the games thus far have taken place during the reign of Uriel Septim. Well, it's important to remember that in the very first Elder Scrolls game, this is, the Oblivion Crisis is not the first crisis involving Uriel Septim. There was a much earlier one, because in Arena, you're tasked with the fact helping the Emperor because he's been abducted by his Imperial battle mage Jaeger Tharn, and he's been locked away.
Yeah, that's right.
And Jaeger Tharn is literally disguising himself as the Emperor, and it's how it goes on for like 20 years. Literally 20 years, you've got this imposter disguising himself as the Emperor while the real Emperor's off in prison somewhere.
Yeah, and that's the setting, and then the this that is like the main sort of crisis, and of Uriel Septim, and then he of course, like he sends the player character in Morrowind to Morrowind to and the story there, storyline sort of unfolds there of why he was sent, why the prisoner was sent there. And that's the thing of like the style of game is like your character is always a prisoner. He's always your character is always a prisoner. There's actually a there's actually a really funny sort of theory that the reason why your character in Oblivion, like what crime your character committed is necrophilia, because in the dialogue option, you're with the dark elf, I think in Shaden Hall or somewhere like that.
That's Skingrad. It's the alchemy store owner in Skingrad.
Oh,
yeah,
sorry,
do you know what the plan is in
yeah.
Cyrodiil for necrophilia? Just asking.
Yeah, and it seems to be your character, because usually your character, basically your character is like an empty vessel, doesn't know anything about lore, doesn't know anything about what's going on, and so you find out information through that. But for some reason, your character, without prompting, knows about that. So that's where the theory comes from. It'd be really funny if it was like like in Skyrim, for example, it's just a long line of your characters are just like caught having sex with a dead body or something.
Oh no.
I mean, it would suit the decline, though. It would suit the decline of the time. That the hero Kvatch was actually just a degenerate who was given a second chance or something.
I don't know. Perhaps it's testing the Christian idea of redemption, that even a necrophiliac can be redeemed.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing is though with
Carry on.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the DEI with the guards. Well, that's another thing, because in the Empire you can notice there's a lot of DEI because, for example, like it's Imperial province, so you'd expect Imperials to be the majority, but know that they're only something like I think 40% of the population are Imperials. The other 60% are all the other various races. So that's some pretty abysmal demographics for the Imperial homeland. And there's also other races in very high positions. So, for example, all of the various counts in Cyrodiil that run the various little areas within Cyrodiil, they're all Imperial bar one. The Count of Shaden Hall, Count Indaris, is a dark elf, and now Shaden Hall is in the east. Cyrodiil, it borders Morrowind, the dark elf homeland, and they do actually give an interesting explanation, and that it's to do with the fact that in Morrowind, one of the great houses, House Hlalu, are very loyal to the Empire, and
Yeah.
Indaris is in with the Hlalu, and that's the reason he's the Count of Shadenhall. So yes, you've essentially got these this sort of race that's sort of carrying favour with the centre, and then installing their people in direct positions of authority within the capital or province of the empire. And then of course you've got the High Chancellor Akato, the sort of Prime Minister of the Empire. He's a High Elf. He's not Imperial.
Yeah, so drawing on like the Roman comparison, it's when you had like Rickmore, like these Goths, these Germanic peoples gaining positions within the empire. And then like even in the Eastern Empire, for example, you had that period in the early 5th century where you had these hilltop peoples, the Isaurians from southern Anatolia, ended up governing the military and then government itself in the Eastern Roman Empire. And there's something that I always notice when you, especially like with Chedenhall and places like that, that actually the empire was sort of. And on the question on demographics, I actually think, I think I think the Imperials are meant to be still the majority, but what you have, and I don't think it's shown well because of like the scaling of how they develop towns and cities. But I think they are meant to be the majority. But what you have is you have a significant minority of others who are in high positions of power, which is I think that's what the idea was. But the trouble is, yeah, I mean, that's one thing I didn't. It's one thing I didn't really like about Oblivion is that I get they want to show the cosmopolitan like legacy of the Empire, which has been going for at that point for hundreds of years. But I do wish they actually shown like more of the. I mean, if they could have done, they shown more of like the Clovian, the Heartland, and Nibonese sort of culture, and maybe even have like. Because I would have imagined, you would have had the average Imperial might have been living in, like, slumming it, on the outskirts of the cities or outside the city walls in like these ghettos or something, and then you have like the sort of middle to wealthy Imperials, and then like the foreign races as well who were gaining from the Imperial system. That's how in my mind I sort of imagine and also the Imperial Legion isn't diverse. That's one thing I have noticed in Oblivion playing it again, is they are still men. Well, for the most part, anyway. I think they're all men. I'm excluding the city guards in this, but the actual legionnaires, whether it be like those that the forest or the regular legionnaires, or the mage, like the mage legionnaire types you find in the Imperial City, are all Imperials and all men. I'm assuming Colovian as well, because the Legion itself is mainly made up of Colovians.
Yeah, no, that's always been the case. Obviously, I know you left the guards out, but if you do go to the city guards, there is a bit more diversity, because I think there's a couple of Redguards, especially in the Anvil City Guard.
Yeah. That's why I didn't include the city guard. I mean, like for example, like in Bruma, there's in the city guard you have like a couple of Nords as well. You have like but they're mainly Imperial. Like the average, like the generic NPC guard is meant to be Imperial, but you do have the Nord and stuff. And the only time I think that really bucks the trends is in Kvatch, where you have a Kashyyyk guard, a Redguard city guard, and like an Argonian guard. There's like one of each race when you arrive there, when all hell breaks loose.
Really? I don't remember seeing a Khajiit or an Argolian in Kvatch.
Yeah, when I played the remaster, that was a few days ago. When I was before entering the the castle to look for the Count of Kvatch, where you have to retrieve his ring, to confirm his death. The surviving guards who were outside, one was a Khajiit, and I don't remember that in the original, so I don't know if that's, but yeah, it was a Khajiit.
I may have to look that up again because I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, but then you do have like 2 Imperial guards who turn up, and they're like, "We saw that we saw the fire in the distance. We're here to help. You know, show us the way," sort of thing. So you know, and this is another thing actually, because the Imperial Legion, and this is another thing I'd get onto, is the politically at the time, and you hear characters and NPCs talking about this, but because of the the destruction of Kvatch, which sort of triggers the Oblivion crisis, where you have the Emperor has been assassinated, all his heirs have been heirs known have been assassinated, apart from one, which is Sean Bean's character, Martin Septim, who integral to the story. And you have this secretive cult called the Mythic Dawn, who are working, whose leader is Mark R. Cameron, who is a relation to the pretenders of the throne in Somerset Isle, who have a long connection to the Somerset Isles, and he is in league with the Daedric prince Mehrunes Dagon, and the idea, and Nirn, the world that Elder Scrolls is set in, Tamriel, and Tamriel's part of, Nirn, is Mehrunes Dagon believes that the Nirn was created for him, and so he's always been wanting to try and reclaim it. Believes that the Aedra, the gods, betrayed him on that. And so he's using the Mythic Dawn to get back in, and to do that he'd have to break the covenant that Alicia and the Amulet of Kings, which set up the protective barrier that protects Nirn from the Daedric princes in their full power, and that's where you have the Oblivion gates, which is what we see in all in trailers, or if you've seen in passing. And you have this, and they don't really go into detail, Hitman, how many members. I've been looking actually up on trying to find. The Mythic Dawn is meant to be like one of the most secretive cults, cults going, but their membership number, like they have members across Tamriel, and it isn't really revealed until after the Oblivion crisis that they were involved. Nobody really knows who was involved during its, like, who assassinated the Empire and what was the Emperor, sorry, and who was involved with opening up these portals to Oblivion.
Yeah, there's
It
perhaps
was,
a bit of a plot hole.
yeah, it was. I mean, it is a bit of a plot hole in that regard, which is that's my only sort of criticism. Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to address a comment by Vingle in the chat. Dagan mentioned as well Lovecraft reference. It was interesting you say that, Vingle, because Bethesda are very enamoured, especially with the works of H.P. Lovecraft. There are many Lovecraft references throughout the game. So in Oblivion, one of the more notorious quests is one called Shadow over Hactor, which is a village to the south of Coral, where this local Argonian woman is kidnapped, and the whole quest is a reference to the Lovecraft novel Shadow over Innsmouth. And then later on in Fallout 3, there's a building called the Dunwich Building, obviously a reference to the Dunwich horror of Lovecraft. Yeah. And then in the Point Lookout DLC for Fallout 3, there's Blackwood Hall in the DLC, and you get the Necromonicon and all of that stuff, and then you have to take it back to the Dunwich Building to be destroyed. So yeah, Lovecraft comes up a lot in Bethesda games.
Isn't there a village? Excuse me, a village in Oblivion, where the locals are meant to like worship the underground, like was it the underground people or something? That was like, wasn't that a Lovecraft reference
Yes,
as well?
that's what I was talking about. Shadow over Hackdirt. So the village
Oh,
has
that
got
is
all
the
this weird.
that is the one. Yeah, yeah. That is the one. Yeah. Ah,
Yeah, if you go underground and you've
okay.
got all these. It's a bit disappointing because in the original game, because of how funky the character creator could be, the original deep ones were really horrific to look at. They look like Neanderthals, but in the remaster, they've certainly toned down their ugliness.
Oh. I've never actually thinking back to it. Even back in the day, I think I never really played that quest, which is a shame. For some reason I always like skipped it or something. I don't know.
Well, it's one. I think it's pretty creepy, but yeah, interesting quest.
Yeah, no, I do remember I remember the Fallout one, the Dunwich building, because that one was like it's like the amount of NPCs that would say, "Don't go near that building. It's evil and everything." But it did give me a few jumps, that one, because there's a few like jump scare moments in there.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, there's I mean, actually, sorry, I'm not going to go into Fallout, but the architecture in Fallout, um, the faces, the faces on the this is from the original Fallout, the faces that they have like sculpted on the side of buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a that's a Lovecraftian reference in on itself. So even from the the original creators of Fallout, it was deeply rooted in there. Anyway, yeah. Um, I was going to say another thing which is worth talking about here is that even during the start of the Oblivion Crisis, you have all these gates to Oblivion, to Merin Dagon's realm, opening up not just outside cities but all over. And there's hundreds of them that open up um, within Cyrodiil, and also they're opening up all over Tamriel as well, all the Imperial provinces. And what triggers, is that the Imperial Arcano, the High Chancellor, he orders back the Imperial legions from the provinces, which sort of starts the downfall. In my mind, it sort of starts the downfall of the Empire, especially the extending to the non-human provinces. And this means, like, for example, in Somerset Isles, the political faction that would go on to become the Altmeri Dominion, the Thalmor, sort of fill the vacuum to fight back the Daedric hordes. In Argonia, there's a similar faction that rises up, and Hitman, the lore with Argonia during the Oblivion Crisis is pretty epic. Do you know about this at all?
Well, all I know is that the Argonians, who've for centuries been enslaved by the Dark Elves, which the Empire had permitted, end up rising up, forming a horde, invade Morrowind, and then basically genocide the Dark Elves. And then obviously that coinciding with the eruption of Red Mountain leads to many Dark Elves then fleeing into other provinces, which is why there's such a large Dark Elf contingent in Windhelm and Skyrim.
Yeah, that is true, and that Vardenfell is gone, and the in the south, because the Argonians were enslaved by the Dark Elves historically, and so there was particularly the house. I think was it House Dress along the border there, were known for their use of slavery, and so they got like the full brunt of the Argonian horde. But before the invasion, the political faction that rose up with the help of the Hist, which is the um, well, I won't go into too much details here, but the Hist, which is like the sort of spiritual connections of the Argonian people, um, rose up, and they invaded as a as a counter. They actually invaded Oblivion, So when the Oblivion gates were opening up, they just straight up invaded Oblivion, and even to the point where it was actually sort of damaging for Mary and Stagon. It actually became a bit of a thorn because they just kept on invading, which I find quite funny as sort of like just charging in there, because it's quite an inhospitable place, Black Marsh, particularly because when Tiber Septim, even when he was conquering provinces, his armies never actually went into the interior of Black Marsh. They only skirted around. So the vast, like, swampy interior remained. I mean, normally it remained, out of direct Imperial reach, but
Well,
yeah,
just address a comment. So, the Jabaka, the remaster woke on that. Not really. The only really woke thing is when you choose your gender, it's body type 1 or body type 2, which is annoying. But other than that, it's not really woke. No.
yeah. There's no, there's no like significant changes. I don't, as I say, I don't think there's any dialogue. There's no dialogue changes at all. It's only just the physical, like, graphical changes that they sort of upscaled it, and the sort of
One thing I
graphics
will,
of it.
one thing I will add is in the remaster they've added a lot more hairstyles than they could do in the original game, and let's just say some of the Redguard NPCs have shall we say more necrofied hairstyles than they did in the original. But I suppose that's culturally appropriate,
Oh
is it
dear.
not?
I guess so. I will say, if you see the artwork for Elder Scrolls Redguard, they actually had like the Redguard actually looked like their hairstyles were more like Mongol, like the Mongol sort of tied back, shaved head, with the ponytail, or more Oriental Asian one. It's quite interesting that. Um,
Hmm.
I thought it looked quite good, but you don't see it. They have now what they corn, what they call it, corn, those corn
Yeah,
style
yeah,
heads.
because your cornrows, because I made a Nord, and unfortunately the default hairstyle for a Nord is the cornrows, so I changed that. So
Yeah, uh, yeah. We was Nords, we was Redguards, um, and yeah. Um, Another thing, actually, we'll talk about the state of the empire briefly, and this is something that I noticed, is that as I mentioned, the Imperial legions have been withdrawn, and so the provinces are basically have to fend for themselves. I mean, we know about the Somerset Isles because of the Thalmor. We know about Argonia because of like the various sort of writings on it, particularly in Skyrim and stuff. But we don't really know what happened in the rest. We know that in I think House Redoran in Morrowind united in the Oblivion Crisis, sort of was sort of like the leading house in this during this time. Nothing really said about what House Harley, because again, House Harley were the you know they held the title of the Kings of Morrowind. So you would have thought they would have a prominent role, but apparently not. Again, we don't, and this is a real problem in Skyrim. Actually, we don't know anything. We assume that Oblivion Gates opened in Skyrim. It's sort of implied. Um, I don't know if it's ever said by any characters in. If I remember correctly, I think there are characters in Oblivion who do talk about Oblivion Gates opening up like all over Tamriel. So I think it's like implied that it does happen everywhere.
the only thing I can think of is I know in Skyrim there's Mehrunes Dagon's deed request involves a descendant of the Mythic Dawn who's trying to restart the cult in Skyrim. So whether there's any dialogue
Yes.
in that quest.
No, I know one of the locals in because it's in Dawnstar, where he lives, and he opens that museum, where he could get an invite to go to the Mythic Dawn Museum, and one of the locals there is sort of berating him, saying, this was a dark past of past of your family. You shouldn't be trying to resurrect this. And I mean, as a result, I mean, I think it probably, as a result of course, the Oblivion Crisis, you had the Order of Stendar, who were an order of like these warrior monk types who go around trying to root out Daedric worship because of the Oblivion Crisis. So rooting out those like the Mythic Dawn style cults from springing up.
One thing I will add is it's interesting because in Oblivion, there's a shrine to every single Daedra prince except for Mehrunes Dagon. They later did add a quest for him in a plugin, which is included in the remaster. So his is a little bit different, but yeah, there's a load of shrines dotted all over the map where you can find these Daedra worshippers, and then you can do quests for the various princes to get a powerful artifacts. It's interesting, but I do think it's another weakness of the world building, because it's like, oh, so you're telling me that there's a shrine to every single Daedric prince that happens to be in Cyrodiil, and they're just allowed to exist, off in the woods or something.
Yeah. I mean, at least in Skyrim, if you remember, there's a lot of the Daedric quests take place within the Reach. I mean, it is spread out there, but there's quite a few of them take place within the Reach, which makes sense because for the Reachmen, they don't worship the traditional pantheon of the Imperial cult. They largely worship their Daedric worshippers. So it makes sense why you have various sort of Daedric connections there. But yeah, that is a problem in Oblivion. You are right. It's they would just sort of exist out in the woods. And I mean, it may have been better if they had I mean, like in ancient Rome, you did have before the adoption of Christianity, you did have sort of various secretive but also publicly known cults that were known, orders and stuff, like the Mithridaic order or something like that. So maybe they could have, sort of, or maybe like a future thing, it'd be good if they could have more of like a Masonic style order where it's secretive, but it's not just a group of people hanging around in the woods by a shrine.
Because add to a point you made earlier, again, it actually does reinforce that Roman element where after the rise of Christianity was in the urban centers, whereas paganism was out in the countryside. And you kind of get that in Oblivion because all of the the temples of the 9 divines are in all the cities, and yet all the Daedra worshippers are out in the countryside. So I suppose it does correspond in that respect.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing the original inhabitants of Cyrodiil were the Ayleids, which was a splinter of the elves of high. I mean, they're basically just high elves. There's no difference. They're like the Dureni elves in High Rock. They're just another branch of high elves. But what made them slightly different was that they would all go on to worship Daedra, because that was how, and they used humans, the Needs who were coming down from Skyrim as slaves around Cyrodiil, and for example, like the Imperial capital, all that the wiped the Ayleid ruins that you come across, all the white sort of stoned buildings built by the Ayleids, including the Imperial capital. And I mean, that's something. I thought, I thinking about it now, maybe the shrines could have been like the Daedric shrines could have been like Ayleid style ruins, so maybe they could have done them in a way where actually it's just a legacy of the Ayleid worship. But I don't know, that's just a sort of off the top of your head sort of thought I had there.
It segues nicely into the first of the 2 major DLCs for Oblivion, which is Knights of the Nine, where you're reviving this knightly order and you get the armor of Pelennor Whitestrake, and the whole goal is to defeat Umariel the Unfeathered, who is a Daedra loyal to Meridia, one of the Daedra princes. So, it'd be nice if all the Daedra were handled in the same way as Mehrunes Dagon and Umariel are in the game, but, they probably didn't have enough time or resources to do that.
Yeah, and you're right, Cyrus there, and the A's primarily worshipped Merida and Malek Bal. Yeah, you had that was that's why Pelennor Whitetake was like he was slaughtering elves left, right, and center, sort of thing.
Tambrelic Giga Chad.
Yeah, it's when they say Skyrim for the Nords, I saw this meme going around where it's the armor, it's Pelennor Whitetake, and he goes Tamriel for the Nords. It's all of Tamriel for the Nords.
I don't know if you've seen it. There's actually a video someone's made, and it's an animation of like Pelennor Whitestrake just going ham on the elves. I can't remember what it's called.
Right.
It's like yeah. And so speaking about Meridia, it's also interesting because I don't know if you've ever gone in here, AI, but there's a dungeon near the start. So when you enter exit the sewers, and obviously you've got Vilverin, the Ayleid ruin, but nearby to your right, there's another cave with an imp outside it. It's called Sideways Cave, and it's one of the more interesting dungeons because it starts out as just a general cave full of imps, but as you keep going, the cave gives way to an Ayleid ruin, and there's all these weird Ayleid bits of script and text which you can read, and basically what it alludes to is the Ayleids that were present in this old city had displeased Meridia, and she punishes them by having the whole city flooded, killing everybody.
Yes.
And so, it's a really interesting, one of the more interesting dungeons in the game, to be honest, because no quest sends you there. It's just right next to where you exit the sewer after the tutorial, and you can just wander in there and find this out.
Yeah, I do remember that. I actually do remember. I think I do remember that. I think I actually I don't know if I've been to it in the remastered, but I do remember that beforehand. I remember reading it because it's text on the floor. It's like these plates on the floor, and you press on them, and it comes up with like it's like transcribed or barely transcribed. I do remember those. And it's funny because there's another Ayleid you come across. There's another Ayleid one where you have these cages, like these cages, particularly like hanging everywhere, and it alludes to one of the things the Alias would do was like wall art, where they basically would slaughter a human, and their innards and entrails would just be like decorated in this sort of sadistic art form. I don't know if that had any Daedric connotations to it, like Molag Bal, but that was just a sort of a byproduct of particularly the Ayleids that worship the Daedric princes.
And you've also got the quest for there's a high elf in the Imperial city called Umbacano, and if you find one of these Ayleid statues, because there's one in Vilverin that's opposite the sewer, he's interested in acquiring them, or pay you handsomely for bringing them back to him, but it leads on a quest where you can find an Ayleid crown, and then if you give him the right crown, you escort him to a ruin, he crowns it, and he's revived as like an Ayleid king, and then he turns and kills you. So he's basically trying to like revive the Ayleid Empire. And it's interesting that when you first start the quest, after you've solved the first statue, he mentions about how White Gold Tower, it was the capital of the old Ayleid Empire when it was brutally sacked by men thousands of years ago. So there's already signs early that he's not very happy about the course of history for the Ayleids, and it's a pretty interesting quest line. But it's interesting that if you give him the wrong crown, he just gets like electrocuted and dies when he does the ritual.
That must be an Indiana Jones reference.
Well, actually, that must be one of the quests in one of the quests in the quest line is a reference, because it's called Nothing You Can Possess, and it's where you go to acquire an artifact after you leave. Some other bounty hunters that are working for Umbacano ambush you, and can try to take the item off you, which is a reference to the first Indiana Jones when the guy takes the artifact from him at the beginning of the film.
Yes. Yeah. That does seem like I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? You know, the sort of reference there. Yeah. Because there are multiple attempts by Ayleids actually, like sort of a revival. But from sort of the Ayleids attempts, but I think normally in lore the Ayleids largely retreated in. You had Ayleids that sort of retreated into the forests of Cyrodiil. You then had Ayleids that assimilated, went into the Valenwood and assimilated with the Wood Elves, and then you had the Ayleids that went to there's a group that went to the Dureni in High Rock, and it sort of simulated there. But the interesting one though is that the interesting one with the Dureni is, of course, they had they weren't as sadistic as the Ayleids, but the hatred of the Ayleids is what animates the men in Cyrodiil, because that's what their founder, the Elysian slave princess, which again, another interesting fact that's never really explored is how, I guess, we always think of the Empire being representative of Akatosh, the dragon, but in many ways the symbols, again, like in with Rome, we always connect Rome with the eagle, for example. But in reality, for the early Rome, it would have been the wolf. It would have been Romulus and Remus sucking the she wolf for the teeth of the she wolf. And so with the First Empire, it wouldn't be the dragon; it would be the Minotaur.
That's interesting.
That it would have been the Minotaur that would have been the symbol of the First Empire, and also you had the cult. You had the cult of heroes after Alicia's death. In the Remen, you had the Remen cult, and then the cult of heroes, who were more. I mean, they weren't. They were more monolithic. They were sort of worshipping a one god, which was sort of Akatosh, but also Lorkin a bit. Again, that's they don't exist in or they're not present in the third era, which is a shame, because I thought that would be quite an interesting one to sort of go into, like, again, just like the Imperial cult, or maybe like a sort of an early form of Christianity. But that's something that isn't really explored. I think it's present. Again, it's present in Elder Scrolls Online. There's references to it, but
yeah, I've tried the Elder Scrolls Online many years ago, but I didn't really like it, so I stopped after trying it for a few hours.
I mean, the Blackwood expansion is quite good. I that's the one. I'm not a big fan of the whole base game with Molag Bal and stuff. That's a bit, but the Blackwood one, in Lilwyn and Blackmarsh region, is a good one, and it's it talks about the I guess the empire that isn't talked about much in lore, which was the Longhouse emperors, the reign of the Longhouse emperors, which is quite a funny name given the term that's in our circles, that goes around in our circles.
Oh, I've never heard of the Longhouse emperors, and please enlighten me.
Right. Oh, I get to tell you about the Longhouse emperors. Oh, this is nice. Okay, this is cool. So, after the Remen Empire, you had the Akaviri Potentate, right? That ruled over Cyrodiil.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. And then you had the Clothing King, whose name I forget. He ends up defeating the Akavated Potentate, and then
I think I remember, because if you've played the mod for Crusader Kings 3, The Elder Kings 2. That's the beginning scenario.
Yeah.
It's the Clovian uprising against the Akavir. I think his
Yeah,
name
yeah.
is I think it's Atribus, if I recall correctly.
Atribus, that's it. Yeah, the Atribus, that's the one. That's the one. Yep, that's correct. And you then have this period where he Atribus dissolves the sort of imperial legion structure of the Akaviri potentates that is dissolved, because it's just he's clearing them out. It's a fresh start. He's clearing them out. He's clearing out these foreign interlopen Asian wannabe types and the snake people. He's clearing them out, and as a result, you basically have this period where the Cyrodiil's fractured, Skyrim is split down the middle, everything's sort of a bit fractured. The only thing that the only province which is sort of united is Elsewhere and Sunset Isles. And then born out of this fracture, you have in the Reach, there is this figure who I believe is known as the Black Drake. And he ends up conquering the Reach tribes in eastern High Rock, and then goes on to conquer the Reach in Skyrim, and Markarth in particular. And then he crosses the Dragon Mountains and Gerald Mountains, and floods with his armies of Reachmen into Calovia, and then into the rest of Cyrodiil. And he then he crowns himself emperor, and he is known as that period is known as the reign of the Longhouse emperors, who were from the Reach, and they worshipped the Reach, the Daedric princes. I think there was only three. Maybe Cyrus in chat, if he seems to be well versed on a bit of the lore. The last one was called like Lerwick, who is one of the whose death is then what triggers the three banner wars, which is what Elder Scrolls Online is set around. So you have like this very brief period of the Longhouse emperors where Cyrodiil was united largely. I think the only place in Cyrodiil which wasn't included was Anvil. That was ruled by a pirate, a pirate queen or something like that, or some sort of pirate queen. But yeah, that was the Longhouse emperors. Yeah, 3 generational rulers. It wasn't long, but it was the Reach did have a moment where they ruled Cyrodiil.
Fascinating.
Yeah, very similar to the Medes, because again, the Medes in the fourth era, they started off as like it was like a bandit king, in Calovia, who then went on to, unite the Calovians and then march on the capital and depose the incompetent emperor. And then he spent I think it was Mede the First ended up having to reconquer the human kingdom, the human provinces, and a similar thing. But yeah, the Black Drake, that's an interesting bit of lore, and again they worshipped. I'm just trying to think which they had some connection to Mehrunes Dagon, but also her scene as well. They had like a selected group of Daedric princes that they were tied to. But there you go.
Oh, interesting. A bit like the Dunmer then.
Yeah, they were a bit like the Dunmer, and it's funny because their closest ally, the Count of Leowyn, who's around, or the Count's offspring. Apparently, the House of Leowyn were very close to the the Longhouse Emperors, like the last Longhouse Emperor. There was like some close friendship there, which is explored in the expansion, but I won't spoil that, because if people want to check that out, it's actually kind of cool. I'm not a big fan on some of the lore decisions, but that one, whoever made that one, was an OG one. That was a real good bit in there. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, there's some logic, because if you look at a map of the Imperial City is upstream, and if you go downstream through Nibelheim, Leowyn's at the terminus of the Neben River into the ocean, and obviously if Anvil's under control of a pirate king, you need Leowyn to have access to the sea, so there's strategic reasons to be on Leowyn's good side.
Yeah, no, that is true. Yeah, the last one deposed for legalization of Daedric worship in the Empire. Yeah, and of course, after there was deposed, that's when you have Moloch Baal, where I think he ends up ruling, or he has like puppet. So you have you have like the Imperial legions are split, where you have like Legion 0, which is ruling over the Imperial capital and island and surrounding areas, and you have basically like Moloch Baal's people running the show in central Cyrodiil and other places. And then the main story is about the Three Banner Wars, and I do have a problem with that, because it's like the Ebonheart Pack, an alliance of Nords and Dunmer and Argonians. Like, come on, guys, that's the weakest alliance ever. One argument at the dining room table, the whole alliance would fall apart.
No, certainly. It does seem very weird, considering what we know of what happens in Skyrim.
The only thing that they did do, I can think in lore, was that they so it was sort of like, I don't know if it was retroactively done or if it wasn't explained properly, but in online, it's only Eastern Skyrim, which is again the more nationalistic sort of anti-elvish one, but it's only like certain houses. So I think like House Redoran and is it in it is sort of joined in this pack, but then like there's other houses like on Vardenfell and such which aren't involved, and also in Blackmarsh it's only like northern Argonia, the Argonian tribes in northern Blackmarsh are only part of this alliance, but the rest of Blackmarsh aren't involved. So it's not like the entire provinces are united in this. And I think that's like they're trying to say, oh yeah, like some of these houses, so like for example, House Dress wouldn't unite because Argonians are there and they don't view Argonians as equals because we have them enslaved. So there was some like law I think when they did some of the expansions, they did like try and fix the law a bit to make it work, but even still it was yeah, seems just like
Yeah, a bit of a
plugging
mess.
gaps. Yeah, a bit of a mess, to be honest. Yeah, like the saving, yeah, a bit like that. But going back to Oblivion though, one thing also we need to talk about the situation of the roads. Yeah, I'm gonna go George R. R. Martin on this. I'm gonna like the situation of the roads. Yeah, what's going on the roads? One of the key aspects of the empire that is for me is the road networks, because that's the function of any empire. And even during this, you have imperial legions, meant to be, they're legionnaires you see on horseback, or the foresters are meant to, you got the foresters keeping the forest safe, but also imperial legionnaires patrolling the road, keeping the road network safe. But you have them, saying to the character, for God's sake, keep off the roads in some bit, because all the Oblivion gates opening. So you end up having like this situation where it's becoming like near impossible to travel, especially late game when you're before the ending the main quest. I remember you'd have Oblivion gates popping up everywhere. It was ridiculous.
And funny enough, I was actually playing a bit earlier, and I was going off to do the main quest to Cyclical to reclaim Time Septim's armor. And no joke, in that journey, I got to a point where I was on a hill, and I looked around me, and in 3 different directions were 3 Oblivion gates within near distance.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's.
Okay.
I mean, again, if this was done like if the game came out today, like a remake sort of thing, what would have been cool to see is slowly like uh if you had a situation where like all the villages and towns outside of the cities, like people started pouring in, you had like a refugee sort of thing, or people pouring in, and maybe even cities being closed off to visitors, or just being closed off because all these gates, and you have like a siege, like they're preparing for sieges, and there's battlements and like defenses being built up, or even moats being dug, or something because of all that. So because one of the things that was unique with the game was these Oblivion gates were sort of like generated as you level went up and as you progress through the main story, which is quite innovative in its day. But it would have been cool to see even like the world and like places and cities change as it went on as well, like something like that.
No, certainly that would have been interesting, but I think there would have been a severe limitation at the time. Today, I suppose they could have done something like that, but it would have probably meant a lot of extra work. So, I'm
Yeah, I mean,
not saying they won't.
yeah, no, they couldn't have done they couldn't have done that at the time because I just would have taken up too much memory, and it would have been, for a short period of the game, it wouldn't have made sense. But yeah, something like that, just you see the changes in the world. But it is interesting. Again, another thing, just to what keeps the roads is fortifications, and again in the game, um every single fort is fallen into ruin and is either occupied by like imps, scamps, bandits, or vampires, or bandits.
Marauders of the more heavily armed bandits. But yeah, that is an interesting
Yeah,
sign of decline. That all of the forts, or all the Imperial forts, which have fallen into ruin and occupied by ne'er do wells.
yeah. I mean, even like Fort Empire and Fort Alicia is just like overrun, and there's no, and it's like it's in ruins, and there's nothing's been done about it. It's again, it's a show of decline.
Interesting, isn't it? Because if you go to a province like Morrowind, there's plenty of Legion forts that are fully occupied. So again, all of the military are in the exterior provinces, meaning that the logistics and defenses of the interior lapse because they're no longer needed.
Yeah, I mean, I remember with Morrowind, like the first like proper introduction you have to the apart from like the quest, but you go up you go up sort of following the mission, you come against Imperial forts, and there's a whole like it's fully occupied. They have sentries, and then they have figures manning the officers in the forts there, and it's just not present. And again, it's another show that the Legion is not and there isn't really any leadership in the Legion. There's no like general or prefect or some high ranking, there's no notable high ranking officer at all present.
Which is
um
interesting because obviously in both Morrowind and Skyrim, the Imperial Legion are a lot more fleshed out.
yeah um yeah, that might be the game decision, but also I was just thinking, if say because the Imperial family were basically killed off by the Mythic Dawn, like Imperial Uriel Septim's sons, I always like to think that maybe if like one of the sons was actually like the commander of the Imperial legions, and then the other one had another position, and it was all like decided, it was all like organized within like the Imperial family, but because they were all killed off, it was like that it cut the head off the snake sort of thing, and that's why there was no there was no like it sort of fell to the Elder Council effectively.
Oh, but no, that's interesting. No, yeah. I'd also see of us in chat, but it does remind me of Italy not having proper fortifications during the early migration period. Oh yeah, no, that is a good observation.
Yeah, true. And of course it triggered in the crisis of, I mean, actually this is another thing I'll be going to draw. This is known in the Elder Scrolls world as the Oblivion crisis. Would this be a fair comparison, given the chaotic nature, the radical changes politically and socially in the empire? Could this be compared to the crisis of the 3rd century during Rome?
Well, they're both crises, but they both had different outcomes, because ultimately the crisis of the 3rd century just led to a reorganization of the empire under Diocletian's dominate, where you had a much more autocratic imperial office than the more more republican-esque and principate, or pretensions to republicanism anyway under the principate. Whereas in the Elder Scrolls, the new Median Empire that comes in is significantly weaker. Provinces are falling out of its control relatively early. So, and again, in the crisis of the 3rd century, you had like 50 emperors in like a 50-year period, where it might be a bit of an exaggeration, but whereas in this Oblivion crisis, the last of the Septims dies out, but it just goes straight to one new dynasty. You don't really see a great civil war between many different factions.
No. I mean, there was a crisis of the 3rd century moment where it was a civil war between the Septims, the actual family of the Septims. That's where you had like Potama, the Wolf Queen, backing her son to be the emperor, and you had Magnus, who was he had his support in Hammerfell. But that's a what was it? The War of the Red Diamond? I think that was it.
That's a bit lore I'm not too familiar with.
Yeah, that's an interesting one to sort of go into, but that's the only thing I can really compare it to. There was like an internal civil war between the empire, like different claimants. But yeah, I mean, overall, there was I think the only comparison that I would say is that in the sense of the only change, there was a significant change to the empire, the Mede Empire. They dropped the non-human provinces. Basically, it just became the Mede Empire was solely a human-based empire, and also they would then go on to drop after the Great War with the Altmerry Dominion, the blades and anything that referenced the Septim Empire. Obviously being from the worship of the Talos as a god, so going back to the 8 divines, but also dropping the blades and any connections to that. So you end up having a totally different style of an empire, but also an empire that wasn't really an empire because it was governed by its sovereignty lay with the elves. The White Gold Concordate that sort of came later, and of course the Altmerry Dominion then were, because again nobody, because of the way that they presented themselves, the Thalmor were the ones to claim that they were the ones that stopped the Oblivion crisis. Even though it was Martin and his sacrifice, Martin Septim, the last Septim sacrifice. That's the Old Merry Dominion were the ones to claim victory over that.
No, it's almost like the desecration of the past.
Yeah, and that's sort of what sort of I sort of garner sort of the popular support, but and Chancellor Kano, he did try and hold the empire together, but he was assassinated by the Thalmor, I believe, which makes sense because I imagine the Thalmor were pretty. There was a bear in mind the Thalmor were very anti-man because of Talos, because of the legacy of the empire and what it stood for, and him being a high elf as well probably singled him out as like the ultimate traitor.
Oh no, absolutely.
The ultimate, yeah. Just trying to. Did you have any other points you wanted to develop at all?
Well, obviously, I think you mentioned it before we went live that there's a very strong in terms of the tone of the game. There's a very similar tone between Oblivion and Lord of the Rings, and so in particular, the game has a very strong moral dualistic quality. Between the ultimate good and the ultimate evil. The ultimate good being the Septim Empire, and the ultimate evil being Mehrunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction, and his demonic hordes of Oblivion. And so, because Todd Howard was very enamoured with the Lord of the Rings trilogy from the early 2000s, because Oblivion only came out 3 years in March 2006, about a couple of years after Return of the King, so it's still in recent memory. And you can see that a lot in the actual world building of Cyrodiil in Oblivion, where the game's noted for its very green, verdant land. Again, it's very traditional high fantasy setting, which obviously is a deviation from the Cyrodiil of the older lore. If you read texts in Morrowind, the Imperial Isle was a lot more jungly and lagoon-like and overgrown. The Imperial City was almost like a fantasy Venice in terms of its layout, but instead they go for a much more it's almost like a Tamrielic Minas Tirith, isn't it, in some ways, except it's not embedded into a mountain.
Yeah, I mean, basically the white buildings, the Ayleid, it is like the Minas Tirith and the Hall of the Steward, the Hall of the Kings, which is funny because in the films that was the creators of that based it off what descriptions of Charlemagne's court at Aachen, which sort of ties back to what you were saying about the Tiber Septim's connections with Charlemagne as well, which is quite a nice one, as quite a nice tie-in. But also the Imperial Legion, because the Imperial Legion, if you look at the Legionnaire armor and uniforms in Morrowind, it's very Romanesque. It's very much tied to Roman. In Redguard and Daggerfall and Arena, again, it's I mean, even though it's very low resolution, it's still somewhat Romanesque. But in Oblivion, it always it does, the armor itself does resonate with like the guards of Gondor. The
Yes.
guardsmen of Gondor.
And then Skyrim, they then go back to having a Roman aesthetic again.
Yeah, and then in Skyrim they go back to. I mean, I think Skyrim actually has them as like the most like peak Roman aesthetic. I mean, that is a straight up Roman legion, Roman sort of legionnaire uniform. That, but yeah, in Oblivion
No, of
they
course. We should probably talk about some other Lord of the Rings comparisons, because obviously we've mentioned Sean Bean, who plays Boromir, literally voices Martin Septim. So again, you've literally got one of the actors from Lord of the Rings in the doing voice acting. And then of course there's other references. There's a quest you could do early in the game called Unfriendly Competition, where you are investigating a local merchant whose merchandise is very cheap for sale, and it turns out that he's sourcing it from essentially a grave robber. And when you search in the grave robber's house, he's got a book of the recently deceased, and there's a fellow in there, one of the deceased he's stolen items from, who sounds suspiciously like a Frodo Baggins, and all of his equipment he's looted sounds exactly like Frodo's. Like it's the cloak with the the leaf fasten, the enchanted short sword that glows, which can actually loot from Agamir, the Nord grave robber. At the end of the quest, you get this glowing short sword, so that's obviously a reference to Sting. And the reward from Foreigner, the merchant, once you've uncovered all of this, is that he gives you a gold band ring called the Weathered Circlet. So again, that's a reference to the One Ring.
Yes. I do remember that quest, and that is again, that's a very clear reference as well. And Sean Bean, of course, voiced Martin Septim, who doesn't he doesn't have exactly the same Boromir arc, but he has a similar ending. He finds the courage, he finds that heroic will, and does commits the ultimate sacrifice. Even the Daedra, not the Daedric princes, but the actual Daedra, who are the foot soldier Daedra, but they are basically even though there are orcs in the game, but they're not like completely morally evil. They're just like any other race. The Daedra, the Daedric foot soldiers are technically just pure servants. They're pure slave servants of the Daedric princes, and also they're evil, and also their armor again is suspiciously similar to that of the Uruk-hai and other orcs, again seen in Return of the King and such. So it also works quite similar. I have a vivid memory of particularly the final the sort of the last mission and the main story, where you have the battle in the Imperial city. And you have the guard, you have the Imperial legionnaires running about fighting and everything, and it very much reminds me of the when the orcs have breached in the film. That is only in the film, when they breached Minas Tirith, and you had fighting in the streets of Minas Tirith between the guards and the orcs. Very similar again.
And you mentioned the Dramora's armor being similar to the Uruk-hai. Well, I often thought their armor and their weapons reminded me of the armor and weapons of the Orcs and Mordor, in particular Sauron's armor that you see in the beginning of Lord of the Rings. And another example is, when you go into Oblivion, what does it remind you of? It looks exactly like Mordor. It's this black earth hellscape with lava everywhere. So that's obviously another clear inspiration.
Yeah, true. Again, Oblivion is heavily reference Mordor, and particularly the towers, the sigil towers as well. Are they are? I would say on a design scale, exactly the same as the Dark Tower in Mordor. Each one,
and also. And when you're watching the intro cutscene, you see this scene of Oblivion of this army of Daedra marching. They've got this great glowing forge battering ram thing, and reminds you of Grond from Lord of the Rings. The giant hammer of the underworld that breaks down the siege of the gates of Minas Tirith.
Yeah. And I recently, when I went through one of the Oblivion gates yesterday in the remastered. In one of the Oblivion map, you have to open up 3 gates, like 3 huge gates, to get to the right walkway to cross into the main sigil tower to take the sigil and close the gate. And I noticed, I sort of like reminded myself that even the gates are the same sort of shape and design as the black gates at the entrance of Mordor.
Yes, I actually that is true because I do remember seeing those as well. That you have to open them with like remote levers. Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, you have like the one sigil tower in the center, and then you have like 4 towers surrounding it, and you have to go from one to the other to um, open each one. Um, I remember so many hours I was lost, so many hours I was lost in those places, uh, especially the
So many hours
tunnels.
lost exploring random dungeons in the wilderness. Oh, what's in this for? Oh, what's in this Ayleid ruin?
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. Uh, yeah, so many hours lost in that. uh, I mean, I think one thing that is interesting about Oblivion is, of course, the legacy that, because it does sort of lead on to. I mean, we talked about that it set up um the scene for Skyrim. Of course, after the main Martin has sacrificed himself and defeated Merin's Dagon, you would get to ask the Chancellor Carno, like, well, what happens next? And he says, well, I'm going to try and hold we need to try and hold the Imperial provinces together, get a new sort of leadership back in and all that sort of stuff. But of course, as we know, that all of that fell apart. Um, and the Argonians soon after would invade Morrowind. You had the incident at the Red Mountain. You had the rise of the Thalmor, who would then sort of succeed. I think Valen would as well, of the Wood Elves, left the Empire and then united with the Thalmor, and then and this is where it's a bit confusing because if there's actually one book, Elder Scrolls novel, that's around the um Atrebus Mead, who is like the
Oh yes,
um
I've read those. It's a pair of novels by Greg Keyes. I forget their names. Actually, I think I've
yeah
got them on my
now
bookshelf. I'm just going to check one moment.
yeah, that's quite an interesting one, people in chat to check out,
Uh,
because
uh,
it
yes, I've got the names.
yes.
Yeah, so it's the Infernal City and Lord of Souls by Greg Keyes.
Yeah. Now, in that, it confirms that under the Mede Empire, because I said, oh, it was all governed by humans. That isn't entirely correct, because normally elsewhere, which is the home of the Kashyyyk, the cat people, was in theory part of the empire because they had imperial representatives on the ground in elsewhere. But this is where you come into the de facto and de jure. Now, um, de jure, yes, it's part of the empire, but de facto, being run by the main. And of course, you had the crisis in elsewhere where the moons disappeared, which then caused havoc because the Kashyyyk, they worship the 2 moons cult. That's their formal religion, and the Thalmor, the Elmeri Dominion, um, the High Elves claimed that they were able to bring the moons back, and as a result, without any bloodshed or anything, the Empire was sort of they uh, seceded from the Empire and joined with the Altmeri Dominion, this happened during the reign of. It'd either be Atreus Mede or the unknown emperor that comes after him before Titus Mede. So this would have happened at this sort of towards the end of his rule, but um, Yeah, that's an interesting fact that elsewhere it did a similar thing with it never went independent, but it kind of was independent. And yeah, Cyrus says, right, Kashyyyk life cycles depend on the moons, and also how they are formed as well, because some Kashyyyk don't take like the humanoid form. Some of them are like little house cats, and some of them are like these huge tiger type things.
No, certainly. A lot of biodiversity
Yeah,
within the within that race.
yeah, true, and they're all sort of, as we joke about, they're prone to mercantile usury and thievery. You know,
Mm. Got to keep an eye on those
it's funny,
Khajiits.
but yes, imagine like a Tiber Septim quote. They have betrayed my trust. Their insistent use of usury has consistently brought down the race of man. I am expelling them henceforth from the imperial provinces. Um,
Based.
something like that. But
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
the thing though is in the law, Tiber Septim. What I mean, yeah, he was like, I'm team man for the for the win, but he wasn't that anti-elf really. He was actually really anti. All like the quotes from him, he hated the orcs. He hated orcs, ogres, goblins, and the beast folk, which were Argonians and Kashyyyk. He just hated them. I mean, he wasn't keen on like the high elves, but he got on well with like the dark elves and the Durrani and stuff. He wasn't. I know he sort of considered like the figure who is like probably from Skyrim as well, like because of the Stormcloaks, but it's like this the ultimate like hater of elves. But it was mainly the beast folk that he hated.
Well, understandable, given their nature.
Uh, yeah, given the nature. Yeah, but yeah, I mean the legacy of the Oblivion game is that you had this sort of collapse of the empire, sort of like the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, where you had uh, provinces like Spain, being governed by Germanic and Iranian tribes, nominally though part of the empire, but in reality, imperial authority didn't have much weight in those places. And so that's how I sort of like in those novel, how I sort of viewed elsewhere. Would that be a fair assessment?
Oh, I suppose it would be, yeah.
Yeah. Same with Morrowind. I mean, technically, I think technically Morrowind is still part of the Empire, or still a protectorate of the Empire. But at the same time, you could argue, well, maybe the protectorate agreement was under the Septim Empire, and because the Mede empires are different, they may argue that it's not the same empire, so the agreement uh, doesn't have the same sort of like structure to it. But I mean, ultimately, yeah, it does signal the absolute decline of the the race of man. And in a cyclical way, we're talking about cycles here. The empire itself, Hitman, you know, the you you had the first era, which we had the mythic era, which was the age of elves, and then you had like the age of men, and in the in you had the ascendance of the age of men in the first era. In the second era, you had the struggle, and then the eventual success of the age of men, and now going in from the third to the fourth era, it's the decline of men, and you by the time of Skyrim, effectively the elves are sort of in all aspects governing the whole of Tamriel. Um, even
Yeah.
through the back door, So yeah, that's how I was sort of in a Spengler sort of style cyclical view of it. This is where you are. So the next Elder Scrolls game should be well, the elves dominate everything, I presume, to be consistent
Huh.
at least. But
Mm.
anyway,
Well, we'll have to,
Hitman, yeah, wrap it up
well,
here.
we'll have to see if they ever release the Elder Scrolls 6 because it's been almost 7 years since they announced it. So
Yeah, true. I think it's going to be set in Hammerfell. I think it's sort of that's what everyone seems to think place is going to be set. It's going to be Hammerfell.
well, considering its name, that's probably unsurprising. My only concern is that it may be a bit of an opportunity for them to go a bit woke, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's one thing I'll be looking out for, and there's going to be those sorts of things in there. Which, luckily, Skyrim was just a bit before all that nonsense. But yeah, you're going to see egalitarian. I think you're going to see some sort of egalitarian nonsense implemented in there. But yeah, I hope not. But we shall see. That's why you have mods, isn't it? Anyway, Hitman, we're gonna wrap it up now because we've sort of gone nearly 2 hour mark now. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for everyone in chat, Cyrus and Hero of Old and Vingle and Hunger, the Dire Merchant, a sort of co-host of yours on your streams, Hitman, and yeah, and Jack Bar. Yeah, thank you for coming into chat. Is there anything you want to promote before we head off, Hitman?
Well, my channel's probably going to be relatively quiet for the foreseeable future. Obviously, I'm doing a series at the moment on modern Iran. I've just had to redo the second episode of that with Hunger because we had audio issues the last time we attempted that. But yeah, at the end of this month, I should be doing the next episode of that where we're looking at the end times of Iran from the late 17th century through most of the 18th century. So if you're interested in doom and decline of empires, and certainly give that a watch when I release that.
Should be good. Should be good. Maybe Ayatollah Khomeini is like the Iranian version of Marco Cameron.
Well, if my opinion, he's somewhat a recreation of Shah Ismail in some perverted form. Perhaps Shah Ismail mixed with like Vladimir Lenin or something.
Yeah, true. Will you cover the Iranian Revolution at all in your
Yes, yeah, we will be going up to the death of Khomeini in 1989 at the absolute minimum. So
okay, all right. So you will get into that. That would be an interesting one. I've been watching it on the side, so do check that out. The Iranian history, because that's an interesting one. A lot of that time period is taken up by that area is taken up by the Islamic rulers of India and the Ottomans. So it's interesting to see what was going on among the in Iran, among the Iranian kingdoms around at that time. So do check that out on Hitman's channel. Anyway, Hitman, thanks for coming on. Thanks to everyone in chat, and I'll see you all next time.